Okay, good evening, everyone. Looks like we are going live, and it is a pleasure to learn with you. Just getting things set up. And as we're getting set up, I can even hear it. Wonderful. Here we go. Pleasure to learn with you. Got that, and I got the live action, and it's so fun. Look at this crazy world that we're living in. I got us all over the place. Live on Facebook, live on YouTube, and now live via Zoom in Sherman Oaks, California. Rabbi Joshua Hoffman presents Prayer Mastery. That may not be the right energy to introduce a class on prayer, but it sure felt fun to say it. So it's great to see friends checking in, and we're glad that you're here with us tonight. Just getting everybody all settled. So as I get all my screens aligned so that I can see comments and to participate, bring in the participation of you, even though I'm doing a direct broadcast, this is a great way for us to begin our class by first saying that this is going to be the concluding class of this series of sessions on mastering the prayer book. It's been a lot of exploration about what are Jewish prayers, how Jewish prayers work, what makes something uniquely a Jewish prayer, what do we do with prayers as Jews when we don't agree with what's being said or how they're being written, and really ultimately exploring the question of whether or not the prayers that we were reciting work. That's what we studied last week. And now we come back to the first question that we actually asked in the very first class, which is why? Why pray? Very Jewish question. And tonight, I think what we're going to do is not only resume that conversation from the introduction that we had, and not only are we going to be able to reflect a little bit on what were the definitions of why we should pray according to the Jewish tradition and the evolution of Jewish thinking about prayer, but now I think we need to add some extra layers, some deeper understandings of why we should engage in prayer. There's some that we've explored in our learning together throughout the class, but to highlight them tonight as we bring conclusion, I hope reveals for you the opportunity to continue to explore a prayer life on your own, to understand its purpose in your life, and to be able to sorry, I just got distracted from my son. God love him and the Dodgers. And to be able to apply these ideas and these concepts in your life, and to grow your soul. That is the work. The work is for us to grow our souls, and hopefully we've done some work trying to define what that means. But if we recognize that there is this aspect, this dimension of our being, our character, whether it's something that is intellectually motivated, or it's something that's emotionally motivated but interpreted intellectually, or it's something that is just sort of inconceivably surprising, that is the experience like joy or like dancing or like love that stretches far beyond definition, that transcends the mechanics of what it means to feel love or to experience joy or to even dance. To know that our soul is a part of that which is indescribable. And then to grow it through prayer is what I hope we have accomplished in some small way in our understanding of this class called Prayer Mastery, and understanding of what Jewish prayer has to say about growing our souls. So tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to be able to go to the beginning and just go back to the definitions of what does it mean to pray according to the literal translation of the Hebrew word to pray. And then, like, if you remember from that class, which was almost 8 weeks ago, that if you remember, we went through by definition the elements which make prayer what it is. And then by shaping those unique explanations of what it means to pray according to Judaism and Jewish tradition, we came to understand why. So tonight there's a few more dimensions, and that's what we're going to be studying. So welcome, my friends. It's nice to see you all here. And now let us take a peek at the text that we're going to be learning tonight. I hope you all can see it. It's showing up on the screen. You'll give me a thumbs up if you can express some emotion in the Facebook, or you can even do a thumbs up on the Facebook screen if you're watching it from there as well. So, if you remember from that class, pardon me. So the first class, tefillah, Jewish prayer, we came up with this definition. Tefillah comes from the root Hebrew word of pei lamed lamed, okay, which means to think, to decide, to supplicate, to hope, and to expect for, which seems like an incredibly complex definition of what this word pei lamed lamed, tefillah, is meant to accomplish. It's a lot of things, thinking, deciding, but also like putting oneself lower and also envisioning a future, and then not only envisioning that future, but expecting that it will become a reality in some way. That's what prayer is about, right? Very simple. Well, you'll remember that we spent quite a bit of time breaking those unique definitions down and understanding how they can all make up some capacity of prayer. And I think what makes it valuable to have so many different dimensions of a definition like this is not only for our effort to try and weave them together for some kind of uniform meaning, but also to recognize that there's an element which we're going to get to tonight, which opens us up to even further definition. If there's so many qualities that can make up this prayer life, maybe there are some other things that didn't get it into the dictionary the first time around, but things that I think we would all consider absolutely necessary for why we as individuals pray. Now, I want to begin with something that I've been taking from one of the other classes that I'm teaching. For those who knew, before we started Prayer Mastery, we did a class called Soul Mastery, and it was an introduction to the Musar tradition. And we studied that for about 7-8 weeks. And through that journey, we explored a variety of midot, qualities of behavior that we ought to be mindful of, and also to work at and to adjust to and to grow to understand, because they help enrich our lives and they give our lives a sense of meaning and purpose. And they also make us better human beings, if there's such a thing that we can define other than just saying being a mensch. So in the midot, which we've continued to learn, and if anybody's interested in continuing to learn, you feel free, please put it in the chat box or go ahead and send me a private email at this email address, jhoffman@bbs.org, and I would love to make a connection for you. So one of the midot is called Mitinum. In Hebrew, the word is lehamtin, to wait. I've used this example a million times. I love it so much, and I learned it from my teacher, Rabbi David Wolpe. He said, Jews don't listen, they wait. Now, I think that he meant it in the way that we most of us experience it, which is that people are talking in conversation, and we're not necessarily paying attention to what anybody else has to say. We're just waiting for them to stop gesticulating their words so that we can just tell them exactly what they need to know. Sometimes we can't even wait, so we interrupt them. That's also a very challenging quality, which, by the way, in parentheses, the beauty of being a teacher in the class in this kind of format says that interruption is only something that can be written into the chat box. And I hope that you know that I will absolutely respond to it, but it might take a minute. So you'll just have to wait for it. Waiting here is different than just kind of like biding your time. Waiting here is just beautiful words that I take from my teacher, Rabbi Ira Stone, who is he is the architect of the Midot and the Musar pathways that I've been using as a teacher of Musar for my students, but also he is a tremendous teacher and continues to teach Musar to his community and all across the country. So mitinut comes from the word lehamtin, to wait, but more accurately begins with to deliberate. It's this idea that there is, before we make a choice or a decision, a certain kind of intellectual process or perhaps an emotional alignment that takes place. And that kind of what we begin to say is stretch out, as you begin to see the definition, to stretch out time before the prompting of a reaction and our actual reaction to it gives us the time to ensure that the choice we make is the most beneficial to us and to others. So let's read a little bit. You'll see what Rabbi Arison has to say. Mitinut literally means to stretch out, in the sense of letting time elapse. It is a midah profoundly concerned with time, specifically taking the time of being mindful of the elapse of time in relation to our actions. So just to sort of like break down the sometimes esoteric sense of the writing, is that mitinut is the stretching out of time. It's the space between. And in the space between, you are conscious of what is happening, the time that is elapsing in that space between. Now, as we go a little bit deeper, how it is that we transform our experience of time as the only thing that's elapsing between the prompting of a choice and the actual choice itself is how we get to this incredibly new definition of what prayer is all about. So he says, we relegate what we conventionally call the present to the experience of the time of the self. When we think about our experience of time, the stretched out between, and the present moment, the time to be decisive, the thing that we have a need and we want to satisfy, we want to say something and we want to respond, that is an experience of the present, a very profound and important and powerful experience of the present. But as we continue, the absorption of that presence, the obsession with living in that present is not a soulful act at all. It's something of the self. So let's read on. The self perpetually finds itself in the present because it has continually conserved itself at that moment. That moment, as it were, never ends. The present is an entrapment in self-absorption. This experience of time, not to be confused with the clock as a scientific measurement of time or in the power of living mindfully in the present, is expressed in the tradition as the experience of olam hazeh. The possibility of the future is precipitated by our encounter with the other. Okay, so again, break down the esoteric nature of the writing. And for those who haven't been studying Musar, you know that sometimes the language is jargon. It's very specific to a certain kind of understanding of the material that we're studying. So just to kind of understand it, living in the present moment entirely, exclusively, or perhaps almost obsessively is an act of total self-absorption. And if you can think about that, if you think about the times that you aren't concerned with the consequences of your actions, or you don't recognize the sort of like past history that may even prompted you in that moment, that present moment can sometimes be a very like liberating experience, or it can be a very oppressive experience. You could become anxious. You could become obsessed with the contours of the present moment, manipulating it and controlling it and crafting it in such a way so that the next moment that happens, which feels like the future to you, is really just your manipulation of the present and a new present that is taking that place that follows. So think specifically, and I gave this example to my students in the class the other day. Just this is a great example. I was driving on the freeway in Southern California. For those who don't live in Southern California, traffic is horrible. And the pandemic has relieved the congestion of the traffic in newfound ways. And it's been kind of extraordinary. there's still traffic kind of like building up. It's like, it's sort of it's the litmus test of really like how well are we behaving with the limitations of our movement during this pandemic. And you see traffic kind of like emerging now. But also in that space, you have something that I think we can all relate to. You have the guy swerving in and out of traffic, moving in and out of cars, tailgating behind cars, trying to get as far ahead as he possibly can, and having a sticker with something that I really feel uncomfortable expressing here in this class, because it's a diminishment of the sanctity of our learning together. But you can imagine by my hesitation that it wasn't something worthy of explanation. And this person who's moving in and out, the at least like the outward form of the person's behavior demonstrated an obsessiveness with the present moment. So much so that it was even to the exclusion of the safety of other people. This is a different kind of midah. This midah says it is important to create the space and experience time. It's important to understand that in the space, there is an ability to deliberate and to undergo a process of transformation so that your choice is consistent with your will or your sense of the right behavior for that time. And that almost exclusively involves what we call the other. And whether that's another human being or whether that's a non-identified amorphous mass of people, or it's something that you would, in the words of Rabbi Stone, talk about the other extended infinitely. It's this concept of the ultimate other. However you identify in that moment, the choice that you make, that deliberation about the other is the possibility of the future. Okay, let me finish the last of his teaching and then we'll take a pause. Thus, Mitinum might be better translated and understood as awaiting the other. Mitinut is one of the tools of our practice. Our work on this midah, which is applicable to a soul rather than to a self, emerges at the point in our spiritual work where we habitually make the choice for our soul over ourself. Before I get to the underlying words, which I think is the definition of prayer. Mitinut means deliberating in the time. It is in real elapsed time, not on a clock, but time experience of action and reaction, of us and the other. And in that moment, mitinut as a midah, but I'm going to now add prayer. Prayer is the exercise, the tool that we use in order to make choices for our souls or for the souls of others, and not for ourselves. Let's keep reading. Meditating on mitinut is a strategy for gauging the progress we have made. Welcome to yet another definition of prayer. To think, to decide, to supplicate, to hope for, to expect, to hope, to expect for, and now it is a sense, a tool to gauge progress we have made. It's a way of evaluating, measuring our progress. Finally, he says, the act of awaiting another is an invitation, an embrace by which the other's burden becomes part of our identity, and our response is no longer from the perspective of I, but begins to approach being a we. That's a beautiful kind of like button on the teaching, which is to say mitinut is one of those wonderful qualities. Prayer is one of those wonderful qualities when we may enter into the moment as individuals, but we always emerge with the sense of the collective. As we studied before, when we conclude our prayers, it's always kind of like it's the time when we know it's time to get up and that things are almost done, when we sing the prayer Eloheinu. And it has that sort of like, psychosomatic response for us. B.F. Skinner would be so proud. And then at that moment, we hear the words, which is all about us and our purpose and our relationship and our connection to God and our communion with everything that is. That journey from the self to the collective we, the communion with everything that is such a powerful experience as human beings. It's one of the sort of tremendous gifts. We know that other animals have all kinds of ways of association. They have families and they have tribes and they have herds and they have coven, right? Whatever words that you want to use of groups of animals that gather together. The human being has the tremendous capacity to gather what it appears or what it hopes to be, all that breathes and exists. It has that capacity. Prayer is the gauge which enables us to measure whether we have reached that capacity. So let me stop for a second. Any comments? And I see some friends. Thank you for joining and learning with us tonight. And I see a couple of people on the Facebook. Welcome. Any comments? Everybody's doing okay so far? You feel like we're moving along and you're ready to jump more into the text? We have a few more definitions, so let's jump into them. Okay. If you write into the chat as we continue, don't hesitate. It will be picked up at another point. So another definition is actually one that I took from that first class, and I wanted to bring it back. Right? It's kind of a play on the Hebrew words. For those who know Hebrew, Pei Lamed Lamed is the word for tefillah, and Pei Lamed Aleph is the word for amazement. Okay? Norah Tehilot Osei Fele. Right? God is, wondrous and praise. And Fele is a sense of wonder. Wonderment as a outcome of prayer is also an essential part of the definition that I don't think or decide or supplicate, even hope and even expect for quite accomplishes. So let's reread what Rabbi Heschel said. To pray is to take notice of the wonder, to regain a sense of the mystery that animates all beings. Prayer is our humble answer to the inconceivable surprise of living. It's a beautiful phrase in and of itself. It is all that we can offer in return for the mystery by which we live. It is gratefulness that makes the soul great. What I think Rabbi Heschel is getting here is that prayer is the act of discovering wonder. It's the act of being in awe. There are many times, we could go to roller coaster parks and we can go down super roller coasters and scream our heads off, and we can be in wonder that our lives are so fragile, even though we really trust that those roller coasters are keeping us on the tracks. So fragile that we do things that are impossible for a human body to do without that being created. My son shared with me today that on the rocket ship to Mars, which is going to take about 7 months, they have the capacity potentially to take 100 passengers. I don't know if they'll do it in 7 months, but it's possible. How can you not be filled with wonder and amazement at something that is possible like that? And how can you not feel that sense of wonderment with words which are reflective of the feelings that you have? Prayer becomes the tool, the mechanism to express that wonderment. It begins by opening up the book and reading with the words on the page. But the words on the page are merely a portal. They're merely a touchstone for you to access this sense of wonderment and awe. And what he says is prayer is the answer to the inconceivable surprise of living. So there are times when things happen, right? I think that there's another way to say that people are very familiar with. Things happen. That's life. Prayer is the mediating force that takes that which has happened, transforms it into an experience of wonder, and even something that is worthy of gratitude. That kind of transformation is the soul transformation. That kind of experience is what Rabbi Stone was talking about, when you have to stretch out time to make sure that the experience that you are receiving and your reaction to it are from a place of your soul, a place of gratitude and appreciation, as we've been talking about, a place of understanding that there is something so incredibly wondrous, so beyond your control, that you are a part of by experiencing this, that your answer is something so wondrous. I think we got to take time to do that. Sometimes we have to act in an instant. And usually when we act in an instant, those aren't our best moments. But when you practice this way, and prayer is a part of your life this way, why pray? Because you get better at it again and again and again and again. And the better that you get at it, the more soulful a human being you are, the more you grow your soul, the more that, in the language of Judaism, the more that you are connected to the presence of God. Let's continue. Any other comments? We're doing okay. So far, so good. So as we talked about wonderment, now we get to appreciation. Okay, to appreciate. Text says, from a prayer called the Birkat Gomel. And I imagine that when we are back in our communities and we are able to be physically present with each other, this is one of the prayers that we need to recite, because it is something that celebrates the recovery from a great illness, a great trauma, something that was even life-threatening. One presents herself or himself before the community and says these words: Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hagomel l'chayavim tovot, shigamalani kol tov. So first of all, you hear the word gomel 3 times, okay? 2 times at this point. Hagomel l'chayavim tovot, shigamalani kol tov. This is the same word in Hebrew as gemilut chasdei, bestowing of kindness, right? This is not random acts of kindness. This is not good deeds like mitzvahs. This is a bestowing, a giving, an act of blessing. So God blesses us when we recover from times of illness and great travail. And the congregation responds when an individual comes forward, but I think as a congregation, we would also have to say this. Mishikamalcha, or you would say if it was a female, Mishikamalech, or if it was a plural, Mishikamalchem, Kol Tov, Hu Yimalcha Kol Tov Selah. May the one who has rewarded you with all this goodness reward you with goodness forever. So what is this prayer about? And how does it help us define why pray? This prayer, as I had mentioned before, is something that's recited in the congregation, in the midst of the community, when a person experiences a great difficulty, usually a recovery from illness. Thank God that they're there present in the community to recite the wounds. It's not something we recite for other people. It's something that an individual has to recite. So that is key number 1. Key number 1 is that this is a recitation of somebody who has internalized and made sense, has gone through the deliberation of their experience, and has reached the conclusion that their uncertain experiences, their travails, their illnesses, or their life-threatening moment, whichever it was that precipitated in that occasion, is now something that their soul comes to the community to express gratitude for, right? It's one thing to be like, we hear people say, thank God all the time. Thank God this, thank God that, right? Really, like it's a common phrase because, people say it and some people actually really believe it. They believe it that when something is happening, they say, thank God. In more traditional circles, people say Baruch Hashem, or they say Baruch Hashem Yom Yom, praise God every day, right? And the idea that we say thanks to God for everything that happens to us is ideally an expression of the soul. And you have to understand that it's not just about words, but it's about a sort of whole radiating being. So hopefully a person who comes to the congregation and recites these words is radiating that sense of being completely grateful for their life, completely appreciative that they have the capacity to return to the community and recite words, completely grateful that life continues from this moment onward, and that a person's recovery is assured. And that's why the words are Mishigamalcha or Mishigamalech or Mishigamalchem Kol Tov Hu Yigmalchem Kol Tov Selah. Just as the one who has bestowed kindness upon you, may that one could be continually exposing you to kindness and to goodness and to healing and blessing forever. It should only be that way, right? This is a dimension of appreciation that I think prayer tries to also accomplish. It's not just about saying the words on the page. This is what we recite when something happens. But it's about the idea of transforming our experience away from our own kind of, even in the most self-confirming, self-obsessive moments of our lives, when we're in a near-death experience or our illness is so severe that we think that we might lose our lives. It is a totally selfish moment. And it's a very scary moment. And this idea that even in those moments, you have a potential to transform yourself, as we've been learning, to deliberate and to take notice of the wonder of what is before you and not what is not before you. That enables you to stretch out time and then to be able to say a word that God has blessed you with, a kindness that could not be given in any other way by any other person. It is that inconceivable surprise of living, which our gratitude is the only response that we can offer. This is what that prayer means, and it's another definition. So tonight we have, remember our definitions: to think, to decide, to supplicate, to hope, to expect for. Those are the core based on the dictionary. Then we added to stretch out or to gauge or measure our progress through Mitinum, lehamtin, hamtana. It is sacred waiting. And then we had wonderment from Rabbi Joshua Heschel, Abraham Joshua Heschel, right? The sense that awe and wonderment, and not only sort of bearing witness to it, but actually having it make an impact on you. That is the sense of wonder that prayer is hoping to achieve. And then finally, right, as we've studied so far, to appreciate, to know that we say words of gratitude that are beyond any hand or any gesture that we or other human beings can bestow. Doctors who heal recognize this. Engineers who accomplish incredible feats that should work as they are constructed, but because they work, they are in awe and therefore deferential and appreciative of the acknowledgement that what has happened has come to be. And now finally, I think, why pray? Because we're trying to reach truth. Reaching truth. I have two writings from two amazing, amazing rabbis and teachers. The first is from Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman, Larry Hoffman, who wrote a book called The Way into Jewish Prayer series. But we also have My People's Prayer Book, which I've referred to several times throughout this class, and he's the primary editor. He is certainly one of the foremost 20th century, now 21st century thinkers and writers about Jewish prayer and also prayer life, and has helped us to transform our modern idiom and our modern expression of prayer in such a way that makes it accessible for us moderns. So here's what he writes when it comes about truth. Perhaps first and foremost, prayer is a delivery system for committing us to the great ideas that make life worth living, because ideas that are ritually construed empower us to do what we would otherwise never have the courage to do. What is prayer all about? It is the ideas that make life worth living, and it is the environment, it is the space in which through ritual we can find those ideas and the value that they contain. And it gives us courage because we have the structure. We're not vulnerable. We're not out untethered in a wilderness or on a boat in the middle of the ocean trying to understand this value of life. We are tethered through ritual. We are tethered through other people and connection through our prayer life. Prayer moves us to see our lives more clearly against the backdrop of eternity, concentrating our attention on verities that we would otherwise forget. It imparts Judaism's canon of great concepts and moves us to live our lives by them. So the last thing that he says is prayer is, it's a motivator, right? It moves us. We see our lives more clearly against the backdrop of eternity. This is beautifully said. I have to think about that, right? What does that mean, eternity? And how do I know what eternity looks like? And how is my life fit in eternity? And I think you can understand exactly what he means. Exactly what he means when he says that our lives become a part of the backdrop of eternity. We have stories that animate us for who we have become to be. We have our actions and the responsibility for our actions each and every day and throughout our lives. And we have this kind of notion that this, in the words of my teacher, Rabbi Harold Schulweis, that an immortality of influence, a concept that says that we can influence others by the way that we behave. Our legacy, our eternity is bound up in that, is something that I think we can attach to. There isn't a destination necessarily, but there isn't a certain prescription of behavior that will exclusively allow us to enter into that eternal palace or not. But it's the sort of concept in the whole way of being. It's this confluence of past and present and future. And it's the dynamic across them that enables us to be in the backdrop of eternity. Right? The human being has lived on the planet for just an infinitesimal amount of time in the history of the planet, in the history of existence. And yet we've accomplished so more. We understand so much more. We're continually growing more. We're sending rockets to Mars so that we can find out what's happening on Mars and maybe hopefully live and populate that, because that's kind of what human beings do as a species. But as much as we do that, as we continue to grow as a species, we all very, very much also understand that we have a grasp of eternity, a way of being that transcends our material or animal-based instincts. Prayer is the capacity to engage in those feelings. It's against the backdrop of eternity that we are a part of this, as Rabbi Hoffman says, Judaism's canon of great concepts that moves us to live our lives by them. The last text that I share with us tonight is from Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, and it's from the introduction of the Koran Siddur. So he writes, the very fact that we can pray testifies to the deepest elements of Jewish faith, that the universe did not come into existence accidentally, nor are our lives destined to be bereft of meaning. The universe exists and we exist because someone, the one God, author of all, brought us into existence with love. It is this belief more than any other that redeems life from solitude and fate from tragedy. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who represents an incredible, talented voice of modern Judaism from a traditional perspective, is able to add in his sense of belief not in the one God, the author of all, but the belief in God at all. And because that God has created all that exists with love, it is therefore that we are redeemed from our solitude and our tragedy, because our prayer is the recognition that we are not alone, and that whatever suffering, and God willing, it's minimal, and it's something that isn't a detriment to your life or the life of the ones you love. But we all know, as we've been on the journey, that that too happens in our lives. It is a redemption from the fate of that tragedy, which is a fate of oblivion, a fate of nothingness, a fate in which life is completely meaningless. Body comes into being, it lives and it dies. The human being is far more complicated, far more soulful, has far much more to contribute to the betterment of the universe than what perhaps the most skeptical, the most uncertain mindset would have for the reasons that we live. The very fact that we can pray, he says, testifies to the deepest elements of Jewish faith. This idea that what we are praying for, why we pray, is so that we think about our being in a sense of eternity, is a really powerful idea. And I'm appreciative that you've tuned in to sort of follow along for a few minutes, because that is a great question. What a wonderful question to ask ourselves. To ask yourself whether or not your life has any meaning. To ask yourself whether or not the meaning of your life is cast in this thing called eternity. It existed before you, and so therefore was a gift to you, and you are responsible for that heritage and passing it on to another generation as a legacy. And if you adopt that, what an incredibly audacious and powerful idea. You accept that as a purpose in your life. Prayer is the tool. It is the mediating force. It is the ritual, in the words of Rabbi Hoffman. It is the sense of wonder, in the words of Rabbi Heschel. It is the sense that we stretch out and gauge our progress, in the words of Rabbi Stone. It is this sense of appreciation that we recite and articulate from the great sages of thousands of years ago, who were trying to help find a way in the midst of what seemed to be solitude and isolation and tragedy. Because they recovered from their solitude and they recovered from their tragedy, why then we have the possibility to see that in ourselves. Prayer is ultimately a recognition that you are possible, that your soul is possible. Sometimes life is demanding, prompts us to react, and we can't spend some time stretching ourselves out in order to make sure that our soul responds. Sometimes we're just not even thinking about it. We get agitated, or we're irritated, or we're hurt, or we lose tolerance, or there are so many things that are part of our human impulse here. That's part of being. But we also recognize that there is a better way. There's a possibility of us being truly who we are meant to be. That's what I think prayer is meant to accomplish. Helping you to become you. In Judaism, you don't do that alone. You do that in a minyan. You do that with a circle of people that you care about, that trust. You can trust people that are committed to you discovering who you need to be. And you in turn, because you can't fully be you without being committed to helping them realize who they are. We have words in a book. We have these words that have been tested throughout generations. They've challenged us to think about identity, questions of identity, questions of theology, questions of behavior, questions of purpose and what we ask for. Help us to define this definition of to pray by the very act of prayer itself. Those words are also a part of the grand goal of quest of discovering you and yourself and your being. For some, it's a simple journey. For others, there's so much fear and there's so much hurt that prayer as a tool doesn't feel like it can accomplish that goal. Anyone who is seeking knows that in order to accomplish something like this, would have to definitely use prayer, however you define it, as the mediating force to accomplish that great goal of discovering and growing your soul. So let me stop. If there was any other comments, if anybody else to add, thank you very much for participating tonight. We're nearing our conclusion for the learning. I hope that this was a good place to leave. I hope that you've enjoyed the learning. I hope that you'll continue learning with me and learning with the other rabbis. And just know that next week, we're going to continue with the prayer mastery class. It's just going to take a new form. So the new form is preparing for the high holidays, using the liturgy of the high holidays, discovering meaning through their ideas, through the postures and the gestures. It's a continuation of this prayer mastery class, but with a unique focus on the high holidays. We'll talk about Rosh Hashanah, and we'll talk about Yom Kippur. We'll talk about the preceding prayers of Slichot, and we'll talk about the prayers that conclude Yom Kippur with the celebration of Sukkot. In about 20 days, 21 days, the month of Elul will begin. And as that month begins, there's really a period of 60 days, 30 days in preparation for Rosh Hashanah, and then the 30 days of the month of Tishrei in which the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot evolve. And then there's the sort of afterglow at the conclusion of Sukkot, those few days before we welcome a month without any holidays, that we are able to take a look back and evaluate, say for ourselves, everything that we hoped for, everything that we prayed for, we're now ready to get started, to accomplish, to incorporate into our lives. And if growing your soul is one of those goals for you this year, then I really hope that you'll continue learning with us in this class. If developing a better understanding of prayer is one of your goals, then I really hope that you'll continue to learn with us, as I hope that you've been learning so far and that it's been of value. So I want to say thank you. Thank you to our learning, and thank you everybody for being a part of our class here. So we are concluding the holiday, or the day of Tisha B'Av. And for Tisha B'Av, we are going to conclude with the prayers of Marv. And I'm going to be reciting them from this book. Some of you will notice that the announcement came at 8 o'clock. If you've been tuning in and learning, I would like to invite you to join with me in concluding the class by reciting the Maori prayers and enabling, at least I know of one friend who is on with us who needs to recite the Kaddish. So please help us make a minyan for him. And then I'll turn back at 8 o'clock, which it'll be just sort of a repeat of the Maori prayers. So if you see my face again, just know I'm doing Maori for those who are tuning in at 8 o'clock. So thank you again. Thank you very much for your wonderful comments. I really appreciate them. Okay, please now join with me. If you have not the blue book, the red book, and the red book is going to be found on page 137. Page 137. If you're able to rise and you want to participate in the evening prayers, please begin with us, page 137. We understand if you're moving on to other Zoom classes or the rest of your evening that follows. Thank you again for joining us. Please come back next week, next Thursday, 7 p.m. for the new Prayer Mastery class, Prayer Mastery 2.1, and I'll come up with the name between now and then, and I'm sure you'll see the information about it. Okay, page 137. Ve'urachum yechaper avon v'lo yashchit, ve'hirbal le'ashiv apo v'lo yechol Adonai Hashem melech yaneinu ve'yom koreinu. Baruchu et Adonai havorach. Baruch Adonai Borach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Adonai L'Mechalam Asher B'Ro Merim Arvim V'Chlam V'Tei Ashirim. El Chai V'Kayam Tamid Yimloch Aleinu Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Adonai Amari V'Aravim Avat Olam Beit Yisrael Amcha Al Torah U'Mitzvot U'Kim U'Mishpatim Otanu Limadita. כי ימחנו ויארך ימינו הם נגי יומם ולילה, ואהבתך תסיר ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. Shema Yisrael together, page 138. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה שאנוכי מצווך היום לבבך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ולכתך בדרך, שוכבך וקומך, אשר תמלאת ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך וישעריך. Take a moment, reciting the words of Shema through page 139. V'haya im Shema Tishma. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. For those who have been tuning in to Facebook, not Facebook, but to YouTube, I just noticed that I did not have the chat function operating, and so there were a couple questions. So let us, we'll finish the tefillot, and if anybody wants to stay on and hear those responses to the questions, you're welcome to stay. Malchuto beraton kiblu alehem. Moshe v'nei Yisrael lachem neshira v'simcha rabba v'yamru chulam. Mi chamocha b'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nedar b'kodesh, norati lo tosef eleh. Malchutcha ravanecha bokeh yam lifnei Moshe ze'eli anu v'yamru Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. V'ne'emar ki v'ada Adonai Yaakov u'gelo mirchazak mimenu baruch atah Adonai gal Yisrael. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom v'hamidenu malkeinu l'chaim, page 140. Ki el shomrenu matzilenu ata malachanu v'rachu mata u'shmor teitenu enu l'chaim l'shalom yetaver olam baruch atah Adonai shomer amo Yisrael. Baruch Adonai le'olam amen. Baruch Adonai Mitzyon tzukenu shleim hallelujah. Yeruinenu yismach libenu v'tokel b'yishdav v'shuvatecha be'emet b'amor l'tzion melech elochayich. Adonai melech Adonai melech le'olam va'ed ki al malchut shelcha hi v'la'al me'ad timloch b'chavod ki in lanu melech ele atah. Baruch atah Adonai hamelech b'kodot tamid yimloch le'olam va'ed v'al kol ma'asah. יתגדל ויקדש שם רבה, ועמד ירחתי בימי פחותי, וחייכנו ויחנו חיי דרכו בישראל, והגדלה בזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יש מרח לאלוהי מאיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתברך וישמע ונעשה, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמי קודשה בריחו, לעולם יקרא ברכתה ושירתה, תשבחתה ונחמתה, דמירם בימה ואמרו אמן. תתקבל סולומון, ואלון דחו ישראל. No, I'm sorry, I'm going on and not being mindful. The Amidah is now found beginning on page 142b. Page 142b, we begin silent prayers. They continue all the way through page 151. Page 142b through page 148. 142b through page 148, the silent prayer. Ose shalom bimroma, Hu yaseh shalom aleinu. Sing with me. Ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshei tevel, ve'imru Amen. Ose shalom v'imromav, Hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshei tevel, ve'imru Amen. Page 149. Kaddish Shalem. Yikadav Yikadash Virabah Bema Divaki Tevim Nikwa Teva Chaychon Vimchanu Chayid Kol Yisrael Agalav Izman Kariv Yiramen Yesh Merav Rachel Me'amaya Yibarach Vishtabah Vibar Vijama Vinasev Yitadav Yitalev Yidalash Mekucha Berichu Le'lami Kol Birchata V'Shirata Tishbachata V'Nechmata Damiram Yama Vibru Amen Tikabel Solomon Valhon Dechol Yisrael Kodamon Jishmai Vimru Amen Yesh Lam Ram Yishmai V'Chaim Aleinu Yoko Yisrael Vimru Amen Ose Shalom Yirmav V'Yaseh Shalom Leinu V'Yoko Yisrael Vimru Amen. Page 150 Aleinu Aleinu Leshabeach Ladon HaKol Latek Gedula Liotzev Reshit Shelo Asanu Kugaya Aratzot Velo Samanu Kimishmakot Adama Shelo Sam Chelkenu Kahem Vegor Aleinu Kechol Amonam V'anachnu Koriv Umishtachavim Umadim Lifnei Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Silently to the end. כתוב בתורתך נעים לך לעולם בהם ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא וביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. Mourners Kaddish. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועלמא תברח ירתה וימליך מלכותה. בחייכון ובמיכון וחיי כל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם עולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויפאר וישומם וינשא. ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה. תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירם בעלמא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. For those who gathered into this minyan in order to say Kaddish, we wish you continued comfort. For those who stayed through our prayer mastery class, once again, what a pleasure to learn with you, and thank you for joining me on the journey. Please come back to learn with us next week, Thursday at 7 p.m., as we will have yet another class to discuss the prayers of the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and the journey that we take to renewal as a new year begins. As this class concludes, and those who are coming to join for the minyan are entering into the room, I wanted to just take a note and respond to Sharon's very excellent question. She asked about whether or not prayer needed to be said in community, because I did talk about that, and I talked about the sense that Jews experience being with the other Jews, and the idea is that in a collective we have an opportunity to kind of like transform our I into we. So my answer is that it is very much a goal that prayer is a dimension of prayer is felt in collective group communal experience, because it helps you as an individual experience your soul in a way that you can't do by yourself. That's at least according to Judaism. Judaism does not have a definition of the soul that is exclusively contained within the confines of the body or within the confines of the mind and the emotion, but it's through the exchange, the in-between, the gathering place that exists between us that helps. So, it's hard for us to do that. That's why we're doing what we're doing right now. Because this moment has told us to all to go to our corners and stay safe, because there's a very serious health threat out there, a very serious health threat out there that we are still connecting. And thankfully we have these virtual tools to make that connection. So Mark adds, prayer during this COVID plague is challenging. No group to join with, therefore meditation is the solution. There's a really great point, right? And just take from the last thing that I said. So meditation is really important because you can't physically be in the presence with other people. So sometimes what we have to do, because we know that this is, part of our prayer is our expectation, our hope is that this is a temporary phenomenon. And that as we're able to continue to heal as a human community and to return to our smaller micro communities, our congregations in health and in safety, that we'll be able to engage in that kind of like gathering space. Meditation is beautiful. And if you're a practitioner of meditation, all the more so, it's a beautiful thing to do. And I hope that you find the wisdom of Jewish prayer and the wisdom of our classes to guide some of those meditations once you move out of your mind and into the heart and into your soul. Thank you very much. And once again, we're glad to have you here. So we're going to move now to the evening prayers. Marv, once again, we just did it for those who were in the class, but we welcome all those who are here to say Kaddish. So we turn back to page 137, and there we'll find the evening prayers for the Marv prayer beginning. Ve'urachum yichaper v'lo yashchit, mirba l'shiva v'lo yichalamatov, Adonai Hashem Malchinu v'yom koreinu, barechu et Adonai hamvorach. Baruch Adonai hamvorach le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu chalam, Amariv Aravi, Asher b'rov Ariv Aravi, B'chma Pateh Sharim v'Vietnam Shanit. Achai v'kayam tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai Amariv Aravi, Avat Olam Beit Yisrael Amcha Avta Torah Mitzvot Ukim Mishpatim Otanu Limadeta. Ki Im Chayinu V'Yorech Yameinu V'Em Negeh Yomam V'Layla V'Avatcha Tavsel Olamim Baruch Ata Adonai Ohev Amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael together, page 138. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך יום לבבך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, שבתך בביתך ולכתך בדרך, שוכבך וקומך, שתם להיות ידיך, והיו לטוטפו בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך וישעריך. Continue silently through page 139. V'haya im shemo nishma. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Page 139 in the middle of the page. מלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם, משה ובני ישראל לכנו שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו כולם, מי כמוך באים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נוראתי לא תוסיף אליה. מלכותך רוב ענך וקיים לפני משה זה אלינו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגילה ויחזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גם ישראל. Page 140, Hashkivenu prayer. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom Eloheinu Malkeinu l'chaim Pros Aleinu Sukkot Shlomecha Ushmor Tzeitenu Ruenu l'chaim l'shalom Yata v'yad olam Baruch Ata Adonai Shomer Amo Yisrael. As the evening falls upon the sky, we recognize that there are those who are struggling for their health and are in need of healing. So now is an appropriate time before we continue with the prayers to offer a prayer of healing for anyone who is in need at this time. And we've seen in the chat box from our friend, our very dear active friend, Rebecca Weisbach, who's so actively participating with us online here. Her mom is in need of a prayer. And if anybody else has a need of a prayer for a loved one of healing at this time, please go ahead and type it into the chat box, and I will do my best to include it at the appropriate time. Mishaberach Avotenu Abraham Yitzhak v'Yaakov V'imotenu Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah Hu Yivarech HaCholim B'Kihilatenu HaKadosha Uyivarech Maxine Kaplowitz Sophia Flores Rabbi Mordechai Kiefer Ronald Grossman וכל החולים החולות, ואת דוד בן ששדה, ואת רפאל פצו, הקדוש ברוך הוא, ימלא רחמים עליהם לחזיקם לרפאותם, וישלח להם רפואה שלמה מן השמיים, רפואת הנפש ורפואת הגוף, בטוב שאר חולי ישראל, השתבח אליו בזמן קריב ונאמר אמן. May the Holy One who bless our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bring blessings of healing to all those who are mentioned and all those who are in our community in need of healing at this time. May the Holy One mercifully restore them to health and vigor, granting them physical and spiritual well-being. And together with all others who are ill throughout the entire world, we pray, and through our prayers, strengthen those who tend to them. We hope and continue to express our words of appreciation, our words of wonder, our words of deliberation, our words of hope that healing is at hand. We say together, Amen. Turn now to page 141 as we recite Kaddish and then prepare for the Amidah. Yikadav Yikadash Merabah, Bemadi Rachute, Bemlik Machute, Bechaychonu, Chanukhay, of Israel, Agalav is Makarib, Yimramen, Yesh Merabarach, Leloyamaya, Yitbarach, Vishtabach, Vibar, Vishaman, say, Vitada, Vitala, Vitalash, Merikuchabarichu, Lelamiko Bekata, Vishirata, Shpakata Benechmata, Damiram Mavimru, Amen. Page 142 through page 148, the evening prayers, the Amidah begins. Please recite those words silently and at your own pace. Pages 142 through page 148. Ose shalom bimromav, Uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imeru amen. Ose shalom bimromav, Uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, Ve'imeru amen. Page 149. Yikadav Yikadash Merabah, Bemadi Rachute, Bemlik Machute, Bechaychonu, Chanukhay, of Israel, Bagalav is Makarib, Amen. Yesh Merabah, Leloyamaya, Yitbarach, Vishtabach, Vibarishban, say, Vitada, Vidala, Vidalash, Merikuchabarichu, Lelamiko Bekata, Vashirata, Shpakata Benechmata, Damiram Mavimru, Amen. Titka Basalon about on the Koiser, Kotamon to Ishmaviru, Amen. Yesh Lama, Ishmael, Chaim, and Livia Koiser, Vimru, Amen. Ose Shalom, Ramaf, we say Shalom, and Livia Koisrael, Vimru, Amen. Aleinu, page 150. Aleinu leshabeach ladon hakol latet gedula liotzev reshit shelo asanu kugoya aratzot velo samanu k'mishpachot adama shelo sam chalkenu kahem וגורלנו ככל עמונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. ככתוב בתורתך, נעים לך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. קדיש יתום, page 151. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי, וחייכון וביומייכון וחיי כל בית ישראל, בגלה בזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם עולמי עלמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויבר ויתרומם וינשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו. לילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירם בעלמא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלום רב ונשמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום מרומם, ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. Thank you very much for joining us for the evening minyan, and we hope that those prayers of healing are heard on high, and also they bring healing to your circles of family in need, and also strengthen you to care for the loved ones in need of healing at this time. Have a good evening. Thank you very much for joining us. Tune in tomorrow morning. Believe it or not, I'll be seeing you tomorrow morning, 7:30 a.m. with our morning minyan and preparing for Shabbat. Take care.